Good evening, everybody. I think we will get started. We've just got a few more people just coming in the room, but given we want to get you back out and on with the rest of your evening, I think that we will get going. So a very, very warm welcome to you all tonight on this information session on the review of best practice in early childhood intervention. My name's Kirsten Dean, and I'm the Deputy Director at the Melbourne Disability Institute here at the University of Melbourne. I'm absolutely delighted to be joining you here tonight. The purpose of this session is to let you know what the team have been up to over the last couple of months as they work on this incredibly important project. And most importantly, what they've heard as they've talked to families and practitioners about what's important to them and what they really hope that the best practice framework will achieve. But before we get started, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land that I'm on tonight, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to elders past and present. But I know that we've got people here tonight from all around the country, so I also want to acknowledge the traditional custodians of all of the lands that we're all fortunate to live, work and play on. I want to extend that respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples joining us here tonight and acknowledge that this was and always will be Aboriginal land that was never ceded. I also want to acknowledge the many, many, many years of disability advocacy that have brought us here to where we are today. There are many individuals and organisations who fought long and hard to advance the rights of people with disability in this country, and we would not be here tonight without their tireless and often thankless work. So before we kick off and hear more about this incredibly important project, I just want to run through a few housekeeping items. I know by now that you've been to heaps of sessions just like this one, but in my experience, there's always a few things that are a little bit different. And we really want to make sure that everyone has all the information they need to take part. So let's just go through a few things pretty quickly. We're recording the session today, so if for any reason you need to step away, please know that you're not going to miss out on important information. You'll be able to come back and watch this session at a time that works for you. We have captioning provided by Captioning Studios. You can access the captions by turning on the captions at the bottom of your Zoom on the bar at the bottom, or you can use the link in the chat that Sarah and Chennai have popped in there. We also have Auslan interpreters from Auslan Services, and they will be on the screen at all times. We are so thrilled that we have so many people joining us here tonight. But because it is a big group, we unfortunately won't be able to take questions live on camera. Instead, what we're going to ask everybody to do is pop their questions in the chat as we go along. Now, you don't need to wait till the end to put your question. We are hurtling towards the end of the year, and if you are anything like me at the moment, if you wait until the end, you won't remember the question that you wanted to ask. So, best idea, as the question occurs to you, make sure you pop it in the chat. We will keep an eye on the chat and the questions, and we will try and answer as many as we can in the time that we have available. We are going to finish on time. Everybody needs to get on with their evening, but we'll try and get through as many as we can. Because we do have a lot of people here tonight, I will apologise in advance if we're not able to get your question. What we do promise to do is to keep a record of the chat and also of the questions, and we will feed that into the work that we were doing. The other thing is that we do have a question and answer section of frequently asked questions up on our website. And if we get a lot of the same kind of questions, we will kind of bundle those up together and put the answers up on our website so you can check there. The other thing that we would ask is that please don't send your questions directly to panelists. Please put them in the chat so everybody can see them. Panelists won't have time to answer individual questions, And I can probably bet your bottom dollar that if you've got a question, somebody else will want the answer to it. So it's better to pop all of your questions into the chat. One final comment about the chat. I do want to start by acknowledging how big a subject this is, how really important it is to people, and just how much everybody's got on their plates at the moment. It's the end of another really demanding year. People have lots of things going on in their own lives, as well as lots of things going on in the disability community, including some pretty big changes to the NDIS. I've had lots of talks with people recently about, and everyone has commented about how ragged that they are feeling at the moment. And so while we really understand the levels of stress and anxiety and heightened emotions at the moment, we also want this session to be as welcoming and inclusive as it possibly can be. So this is a really good time for a very gentle reminder to please keep the conversation, the comments and the questions respectful and inclusive. And also to say that if you're finding the session really difficult or distressing and you need to take a break, please do so. Please step away. As I said, we are recording the session, so you will be able to come back and watch it at another time that really works for you. So, how is tonight going to work? Well, first of all, I'm going to introduce you to the team that is carrying out the project. And then I'm going to ask them some questions about what they have been doing, what they've been hearing, and then what is going to happen next. So without, I think that's enough housekeeping. Without any further ado, please let me introduce you and let you know who we've got on the webinar this evening. So we have Tony Kirk, who is the Acting Director of the Early Childhood Supports and Disability Gateway at the Department of Social Services. We have Professor Christine Imms, who's the Director of the Healthy Trajectories Child and Youth Disability Hub, and she's also the project lead. And then we have all of the fabulous project partners. We've got Skye Kokoschki-Moore, who's the Chief Executive Officer of Children and Young People with Disability Australia. We have Karen Dimmick, who is also the Chief Executive Officer at the Association for Children with Disability. We have Gretchen Young, who is the Executive Director of Programs at SNAKE, the National Voice for Our Children. We have Tim Moore, who's the Lead Researcher at the Centre for Community Child Health at the Murdoch Children's Research Institute. We have Kerry Bull, who's the Vice Chair, Professionals and Researchers in Early Childhood Intervention. And last but not least, we have Professor Bruce Bonyhady, who's the Director at the Melbourne Disability Institute here at the University of Melbourne. So, Tony, I'm going to start with you. So the Department of Social Services has commissioned this project. Can you talk to us about what you hope the project will achieve and why you think it is so important to do this work now?
Thanks, Kirsten. Very honoured to be presenting and to join everybody here and presenting from the lands of the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people. So the review of best practice in early intervention as a key part of the Early Childhood Targeted Action Plan under Australia's Disability Strategy 2021 to 31, especially Action 2.4. And the purpose of the Early Childhood Targeted Action Plan is to strengthen early identification, information, supports and pathways for children with disability or developmental concerns and their families. This project will contribute to these objectives. And to do this, the project will develop nationally consistent guidance for best practice in early childhood intervention and support children with developmental concerns, delay or disability to have the best possible start in life. Now, following a recent competitive procurement process, the Department of Social Services engaged a consortium led by the University of Melbourne to deliver the project. This consortium was selected based on the extraordinary breadth and depth of the expertise displayed by the consortium partners. And as we'll see, the University of Melbourne's team brings together academic and clinical expertise, international experts and leaders, as well as the essential First Nations perspectives. So this review also includes in-depth stakeholder consultation to ensure the needs of parents and carers of children with developmental concerns, delay, and disability, and the views of the broader sector are all included, understood, and reflected in the framework. Going forward, I know we're all looking forward to the tools and resources that will be developed as part of this project to help practitioners, professionals, and families understand and use the framework. And as I'm sure everyone is aware, there's a great deal of broader reform work in progress in the disability sector at the moment. And this project is intended to align with and inform this reform work, and also take into consideration the findings of the NDIS review. So I'd like to take this opportunity to thank everyone for registering their interest in this work, and to the consortium members for their work to date.
Thanks so much, Tony. It's something of an understatement to say there's a lot happening at the moment. Christine, I'm going to turn to you now. You've got the enormous task of leading this really big project. For those that don't know, can you tell us a little bit about the different parts of the project and then where each part is up to?
Thanks, Kirsten. Christine speaking. It is also my pleasure to be here tonight and to also be working in partnership with what is an incredible team. So the purpose of the work is to review best practice, as Tony has just outlined, in early intervention for children with developmental concerns, delay, or disability. So really important that we think broadly about the children and families that we're referring to as part of this review. So we've actually been undertaking a review that considers information and evidence from Australia as well as around the world. But most importantly, that we have been consulting and will continue to consult with families, young people with disability, professionals and practitioners, so that we absolutely have their views and their perspectives about what works best for children and families, no matter where they live in Australia. So it's really important that everyone's views are welcomed and are being considered as part of this review. So the opportunities to consult and to talk to us and share your views are not over yet. So and we're at an important part. So the review team is drawing on their expertise, and I think what's really nice about this particular team is the breadth of experience that is brought together into this team. And then what we are doing with the evidence that we have from research and from other literature, as well as information and evidence from lived experience and from practitioner wisdom and experience, that we're bringing all of that together and synthesising it together so that it's the result of all of that work that will be combined into developing a practice framework. So the project, as Tony has already indicated, will also produce the resources that help practitioners, professionals and families and managers, service managers actually use the information. So it's meant to be a very practical, implementable framework. So I think that's really crucial. So that obviously that implementation is going to be an ongoing piece and a very important piece. So far, what we're up to is we have in fact completed the desktop review, which actually comprised 3 separate reviews: a narrative review, a scoping review, and a systematic review. And that together, collectively, those reviews were addressing the question of what is best practice in early childhood intervention. And Tim's going to speak to that in a little bit more detail. We've also done our first round of consultation, and hopefully many of the people on the call tonight will have had an opportunity to take part in that. It was done in 4 parts, really designed to try and reach 4, broadly speaking, 4 different stakeholder groups. And each was led by a review partner, so professionals and researchers in early childhood intervention, and Kerry's going to give a description of what we learned through that. The young people's study, and Sky is going to talk about that, where we spoke with young people about their experiences of childhood intervention. The Association for Children with Disability, who led the review with families and parents and carers, and Karen will talk to that. And then SNAKE's review around SNAKE's engagement activities with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island families and peak bodies, and Gretchen is going to talk about that. And not only that, but we've also written the review report, and the review report aims to simply bring together what was learned from the desktop review and the consultations, really just putting it all in the same bucket, if you like, so that we can then start to really work with that content in the development of the framework. So All of those reports, the desktop reviews is one combined report, and the 4 consultation reports are all available on our website. So you're welcome to enjoy those at your reading pleasure. Some of them are a little longer than others, but we hope you enjoy those and can use them. Thank you, Kirsten.
Thanks, Christine. And that was a fantastic segue to Tim. I'm just going to give everybody a moment to bring up. We've got some slides to share to help us through the next couple of speakers. So Tim, I'm going to turn to you. As Christine said, you were involved in reviewing all of the national and international literature on best practice in early childhood intervention. Can you talk us through a little bit about what you found? And for those of us who are not academics, what were the key insights, the key things that you took away from this review?
Yes, thank you, Kirsten. Well, what we began with was to look at the existing national strategies and frameworks, such as the National Early Years Strategy, and there are a number of others. 3 things stood out. First, the overall aim of early childhood intervention services should be the same as that for all other children, and that is to ensure that children who have developmental concerns, delays, and disability thrive, which is the goal we have for all children. We haven't actually framed it in that way before. Second, early childhood intervention services need to be part of a wider system of services rather than being a separate disability service stream. That has implications for things like foundational supports. Third, a national early childhood intervention best practice framework needs to be consistent with the national quality, safeguarding and accountability frameworks. Next, we had a look at the evidence about children with developmental delays and disabilities and how they develop and learn. And the key findings here were, well, there are a lot, but let me pick out some important ones. First, all disabilities form continua. That is, all disability lies on a continuum from little disability or no disability to extreme disability, and there is no cut-off point anywhere. Second, there are many commonalities between different forms of developmental concerns and delays, and many common strategies that are effective with children who have diverse conditions. Third, children with developmental delay or disability have the same core needs as all children, but may have difficulty having these needs realised because of the nature of their disabilities. So keeping in mind the core needs is important. Fourth, children learn in every environment in which they spend time, and they develop new skills by having multiple opportunities to practice functional skills and to participate meaningfully in everyday settings. And participation is central to what we are on about. Being able to participate in home, community, early childhood settings and school settings. Finally, a key finding about children was that building a sense of agency and self-determination is an important goal for any child, but it's especially important for children with developmental delay or disability, as they risk not having the opportunities to choose and have a say that other children are given. So that needs to be very much on our agenda. We also had a look at what the evidence tells us about families of children with developmental delay and disability. And the key finding there, of course, is that these families have the same core needs as other families, but again, like the children, may have difficulty having these needs met because of the nature of the child's disability or the constraints that places upon the family's ability to work and participate in community activities. Another finding was the importance of positive social support and peer support, critical for all families, but particularly important for children with developmental concerns, etc., because they may not have as much opportunity to get that support. And another finding was the kind of reframing of the experience of families of children that has taken place. We used to talk about a story that focused on grief and trauma and chronic sorrow, and we're now more inclined to focus on acceptance and adaptation and realistic hope. Finally, we had a look at the evidence about services for children with developmental delay. And the key findings here were the critical importance of building positive relationships with parents, the importance of functional assessments, focusing on what children can do rather than on diagnostic assessments, the importance of learning in natural environments, the importance of promoting the capabilities of families and a family quality of life. And overall, there was a broad confirmation of the core principles of the existing Australian best practice principles, but with some new principles and new understandings to consider. Finally, we identified a long list of implications for a best practice framework, which we are drawing on as we develop the framework. Thank you, Kirsten.
Thanks, Tim. Gretchen, if I can turn to you now, we know that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander families often experience significant barriers in accessing services for their children, particularly services that are culturally safe. Can you tell us a little bit about what you heard when you talked to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander families about their experiences? And then what did you hear from practitioners? What did they say is important when it comes to good practice in early intervention?
Yeah, thank you so much, Kirsten, and thank you for the opportunity to address some of our findings. I'd also like to thank all of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander jurisdictional peaks, Aboriginal community-controlled organisations, families and other people who generously shared their knowledge and experience of supporting our children with developmental concerns, delay or disability with the SNAKE team. As you can see, in terms of our targeted engagement was through semi-structured yarning in a range of multiple locations that were both regional, urban, some online. So if we can go to the next slide, please, Kirsten. So in terms of what we heard about best practice looks like, we heard that culture is inclusion. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander ways to accept the child as they are and let them go at their own pace. There's no rush to make them fit as long as there is no harm. As far as it can be ascertained, people were part of the community no matter what their differing abilities might have been, with historically no word for disability in any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander language. We heard that the whole community has a stake in good outcomes for children. Extended family, community members and elders also contribute to child raising and are seeking shared knowledge of early childhood developmental journeys. We heard that culture is essential. We need all services and practitioners to respect Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander values and ways of doing, knowing, being and child rearing to promote self-determination at all levels, those levels being community, organisation, family and children, to take strengths-based, family community-centred approaches, to act to decolonise assessment, support and service practices and measuring change so that these processes are determined by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and ultimately are culturally safe. As well as this being the right thing to do, it's absolutely necessary in order to address our community's widespread fear of child removal as a likely outcome of seeking help for children with developmental concerns, delay or disability. We also heard that there's a need for flexible, timely, family-specific and determined supports that are place-based. Every child and family has their own particular needs, aspirations and circumstances, with responses needing to be tailored and adapted to recognise and fit the diversity of cultures and circumstances of communities. Education is every child's human right.
Everyone has a right to be included and to participate so that they can learn and thrive. Lastly, we heard loud and clearly that wraparound supports for the whole family, family determined, non-judgmental, holistic and integrated supports that enables the family to meet its wider needs and therefore to be able to provide an environment for children to thrive. The last slide around what we heard about what is working well is Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander ways of knowing, being and doing are essentially holistic and inclusive. We heard multiple examples where community-controlled organisations have adopted safe, integrated and holistic supports into everyday situations for families and children despite systemic and funding barriers to these approaches. Playgroups are a great example. Early childhood centres, Aboriginal community-controlled organisations are all great examples. Thank you, Kirsten.
Thanks so much, Gretchen. Karen, if I can turn to you now. Association for Children with Disability and CIDA have been working together over the last couple of months to reach parents and families to talk about what's important to them when it comes to early intervention. Can you tell us a little bit about what you've been doing and what you've heard?
Great, thanks, Kirsten. Well, we have held consultations around the country with partner organisations in different states, meetings like this really to hear directly from families. And I do just want to acknowledge those who turn up to a session to really share their experiences and expertise to make the road a little smoother for the children and families who are coming after them. So this is who we heard from. We have had 7 online sessions. We had about 97 families attending those. More than 90% were women, of course, reflecting the primary role of mothers, particularly in caring for little people. We also reached culturally diverse and First Nations families, and 15% of the parents identified as having a disability themselves. The vast majority of families that attended, their children were sort of aged 6 and 7. So this was a real live space for them and very sort of current experience. But perhaps let me share what we heard from families. And we've got a couple of slides on that. And rather than reading the slides, I'm actually just going to share some quotes directly from families that really illustrate the points that they valued, that they saw as really important in good early childhood intervention. Firstly, they absolutely wanted services to be best practice. It is important because accessing therapy takes a lot of resources. From me as a parent and my child, it's got a cost in terms of what we do with our time and what my child doesn't get to do with that time. It's got to be worthwhile and it's got to be best practice. There were really, really consistent themes around the importance of promoting inclusion in education and some beautiful examples shared. Our physio helped my son participate fully in his first sports day carnival at school, and communication boards were added to the child's education, early childhood education room. Staff were educated on their use, and my son was able to communicate with others. These and so many examples were really, really valued. But the importance of seeing the child and family as a whole group and network and system as they interacted and worked with each other. Families really valued the role that therapists took to gently teach them about modelling things for them and the siblings, concepts like co-regulation, being unflappable and being able to put the wheels back on if they fall off. Siblings were also mentioned a lot in the consultations because, of course, for families, it's all their children. Inviting siblings to sessions to help with sibling rivalry and develop relationships between them. I was so thankful for the skills they both gained in one session, how to communicate with each other and how to take turns. Families also really value when early childhood intervention sees that there are other things going on in the family life and that families have multiple priorities going on and that it is a juggle, and the need to keep therapy simple and clear and really embedded in the day-to-day routines of the family. Coming into the family home was really valued. And people highlighted when there things like there was a family breakdown and now 2 family homes, how important it was for the therapist to be there in both. Of course, families really talked about their children enjoying therapy, wanting to be there, that's when they could see that the best things were happening, and that their child was getting the most out of it, and really building on the child's interests and capabilities. I particularly liked this example where the physio was great at building the child's interest, and this child often had a real strong interest to motivate her in doing exercises. She likes sheep, and he pretends to be a sheep. So I'm hoping that families here and therapists here tonight can see things that resonate with them in terms of what's important to them and what they're currently doing in their practice. But overall, when asked what was important about what therapy was achieving and what was happening for them through early childhood intervention, families talked about, I see my child's confidence increasing, improved family connections, and a happier child. I feel less fear about the future and what supports and how they're going to work as she gets older. And I feel like we can really enjoy each other as a family. So this was the overwhelming themes of what came out of our family consultations. Thanks, Kirsten.
Thanks, Karen. Lots of clapping and lots of comments in the chat about how much that resonates with people, certainly resonates with me. Because you and Sky did this together, I'm going to sneak in a second question for you, which is the idea of a best practice framework kind of seems like it's more aimed at practitioners and organisations rather than families. But that's not intended to be the case with this framework. We want it to be used by families. So what did families say that it needed to look like so that it would actually be useful to them?
Thank you. We did ask this question, and families really talked about that experience of the uncertainty and the unknown at the start of their early childhood intervention journey, learning about their child's developmental delays or disability, and that something like a framework can be a bit of a touchstone when you have many different sources of information, information obviously directly from your therapist, from others that you're connected with, and that you're trying to weigh all these things up. And that hopefully what it is assurance to families, you're on the right track. Yes, what you're hearing, what you're doing is right. But if people do have concerns about, is this the right approach? It gives them some information they can lean on, they can share with professionals and say, look, here is the best practice framework. This is what we want to be working towards.
It's that old saying, isn't it, Karen, that kind of knowledge is power.
Knowledge is power.
So Sky, I'm going to come to you now. In the consultations, we not only talked to parents and families about their experiences, we also reached out to young people to ask them to think back and to reflect on their experiences of early intervention and how they felt about it now. So what did you hear from the young people that you talked to?
Sky speaking. Thanks, Kirsten. Good evening, everyone. Well, this part of the consultation was undertaken as a qualitative study with young people who had received early childhood interventions for developmental delay or disability in Australia. We purposefully sought to engage with young people aged 15 to 30 with a range of ages in that period, and also with a range of backgrounds, cultural identities, and conditions. Following an expression of interest phase, 21 young people took part in a semi-structured interview. We explored their experience of childhood intervention and supports, what worked well, what didn't work, and what they valued now that they were older. We also asked what messages they would send to their younger selves, their parents and therapists, and their advice for early childhood intervention. About half of the young people required communication supports that we spoke with, half identified as female, 4 were from culturally and linguistically diverse communities, and 1 identified as Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander. Moving on now to the messages that we heard from the young people. Young people, when speaking to themselves as a child, said that they wanted to send themselves the message that they are okay. First off, that reassurance that there was actually nothing wrong with them as people. And second, some spoke of the value of persisting with therapy, that there might be lifelong benefits from what is learned by that child during that time. The messages to parents were predominantly based on reassurance and care, because while there were many messages of gratitude, there was also concern for the well-being of parents and caregivers. The key message that we heard from young people was, "I'm okay, and I need you to be okay too." Young people spoke of their awareness of when things were not okay for parents or for the broader family. Young people also described what they valued about what parents did and what they thought might have been helpful. And some of the young people spoke of distressing experiences of feeling unsupported by parents and the cost of the relationship that then ensued. When it comes to the messages to therapists and teachers, these emphasised the importance of early childhood intervention as being child-centred, as in knowing the child before focusing on the therapy goals. We also heard that assessments need to be navigated with care because assessments come with judgment. Young people also had some specific advice for early childhood providers. For example, taking a holistic approach, making therapy fun, building rapport with the child and keeping an open mind, and the need to work collaboratively across all of those who are supporting the child. In this slide, the participant guidance for early childhood intervention suggests that best practice for children happens when it respects children's rights, it protects them from harm, and allows children to have a good childhood. Best practice also happens when it's focused on functional, meaningful goals aligned with child and family values and based on their interests. Best practice is provided in settings with family and peers where children spend their time. And as one participant said, make it a childhood memory, not a therapeutic memory. Early childhood intervention should also be strengths-based. And in best practice, it supports choice and autonomy. It protects children's emerging identities and their sense of self, and is delivered by skilled professionals who value childhood and can explain the why of therapy. And finally, best practice is set within a system that provides continuity. Participants also indicated that best practice would value lived experience and provide access to role models with disability as well. Thanks, Kirsten.
Thanks, Guy. That is such a beautiful quote. I want to make childhood memories, not therapeutic and you would have seen there's lots and lots of love hearts and clapping to kind of all of those reflections. Kerry, if I can turn to you now, you have been going backwards and forwards across the country, speaking to hundreds of practitioners and professionals about what best practice means to them. So I am absolutely going to ask you to do the impossible now. Can you summarise for us what you've heard in those conversations and what are the key things that people are saying have to be included in the framework?
Thank you. Denise Luscombe and I had the privilege of hearing from over 1,250 professionals through a national survey, online discussions and live forums, and we thank them for sharing their knowledge and experience with us in such an open and genuine way. Firstly, 582 professionals with representation from all states and territories completed a survey with questions related to their perceptions of best practice, aims, principles, guidelines, and their professional development needs. Secondly, 389 professionals attended online consultations. Generic consultations were available to all interested professionals and were centred around 3 topic areas. The purpose of these sessions was to hear professionals' perception of best practice in early childhood intervention and the elements that should be included in the framework. We also discussed the guidelines that are currently being used, current challenges and solutions to best outcomes, and the resources and professional development needed to support implementation. Targeted consultations were through direct invitation to specific groups of practitioners, researchers, professional and advocacy organisations, peak bodies and policymakers in order to gain insights from the broader field. And lastly, over 300 professionals participated in forums that were held in each capital city and other places in between, such as Launceston, Cairns, Alice Springs, Broome, Kununurra and Karratha. These 3-hour workshops allowed us to dig deeper and invite creative responses about what should be included in the framework. There was such a rich conversations coming from a broad range of professionals across disciplines and from the health, education and disability sectors. When we pulled all the information together, we found 4 primary themes. The first theme was about professionals' perceptions of best practice in early childhood intervention that was typically described as taking into consideration 3 sources of evidence: the current literature, family experience and wisdom, and professional expertise and judgment. Participants shared what they considered should be the values that underpin the framework. Interestingly, we found from the survey that only 30% of the respondents currently use a guideline or framework. Those most currently used were the National Guidelines for Best Practice in Early Childhood Intervention, the Early Years Learning Framework, and the National Guideline for Supporting the Learning, Participation and Wellbeing of Autistic Children and their Families in Australia. The second theme outlined the key aims and outcomes professionals considered should be included in the framework for children, families, the community and service providers. They generally had a shared vision of what the aims and outcomes should include. The third theme was about principles and practices, and here we also found a shared view of the principles that should be included in the framework, although the words used to describe them often varied. 4 key principles were identified: strong children and families that include child-focused and family-centred elements, connected and inclusive communities, diversity and equity, and quality improvement. Understandably, principles and practices sometimes merged as professionals grappled with definitions and terminology. They called for the framework to provide clear definitions and descriptions of what it looks like when it's working well. Implementation of the framework was raised as a critical issue by many professionals. There was a sense of hope in many of the in-person consultations, with participants expressing optimism and excitement about the possibilities for the future. However, confidence in the systemic changes required to support implementation was not universal. Professionals want the framework and associated resources and professional development to bring high-quality practice to life and be clear about what good practice looks like and doesn't look like. As one professional said, the guidelines need to be specific about what is and what is not best practice to highlight the difference for families and for practitioners, particularly those who have never known anything but the current state of early childhood intervention delivery. We heard many concerns about the current service system and some tension about the approaches to providing evidence-informed services. There was a call to reinvigorate a workforce that's skilled and knowledgeable about early childhood intervention, with accountability for providing high-quality programs. But the fundamental importance of respectful and responsive relationships at every point was felt to be at the heart of effective early intervention. This is reflected in the word cloud illustrated here, which is a collation and distillation of over 1,000 responses to the question, what values should underpin the framework? And lastly, we heard from professionals a deep commitment to the early childhood intervention sector, respect for each other, and dedication to children, families, and community. Thanks, Kirsten.
Thanks so much, Kerry. What I really love and what I hear as a kind of common theme across all of the consultations is this idea of hope and positive and optimism. I love, and that was in the word cloud as well. Christine, I'm going to come back to you to wrap this part of the session up before we get to some of the incredible questions that I can see coming through in the chat. So as been really clear, I hope, to everyone tonight, there's been an amazing amount of work done over the last couple of months. Can you tell us what happens next? And I noticed that some folks have asked in the chat, is there a chance to still get involved? So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Kirsten. It's Christine speaking. The answer to the second part of your question is yes, and I'll come to that. So what we're working on now is the draft of the framework that is in development, and we are imminently going back out to consultation. So we'll be bringing the draft framework to check in with the community in this last sort of few weeks of the year in 2024, and then we will pick it up again in the new year. We're very conscious that that festive season towards sort of middle to late December through into the sort of early to middle January, it's not a good time to consult, so we won't be trying. But we will start consulting before we enter into that phase of the year, and then we'll pick it up again in the new year and come out to you with the draft framework, with questions about, what's missing, have we got it right? We've got some choices to make. What are your perspectives about how it's all coming together? So I think that's really important. There's definitely an opportunity to continue to contribute. So the other thing that we're working on is, alongside the development of the framework, is of course the work of identifying and starting to develop resources, measures, training and so on that are going to be needed to really support the implementation of the framework. And we'll also be consulting about those resources as we move into that phase. And so again, making sure that there's an opportunity for commentary. We do not want to reinvent any wheels. There are things that exist that we know are, and I noticed in the chat there were some comments around being trauma-informed in practice, and so really drawing on excellent resources in those spaces that support learning around those particular issues that are so pertinent. And then finally, we'll be also developing up a communication strategy to support implementation. But I would say that the most important upcoming priority is actually the implementation of the framework. Now, we're due to deliver our final product sort of early April next year. Of course, the framework will come before that. It'll be the other resources that come a little later from there. But the really important piece will be, what are the conditions for successful implementation of a practice framework for early childhood intervention? So what actually is needed to be in place across our community to really support the practical use, the implementation of a practice framework. So connecting the framework to practitioners, to organisations, but also, and again, I've seen comments in the chat, connecting the framework to foundational supports and the NDIS review changes and developments in early childhood and early education sort of sector. We've totally aware that this is a very busy part of Australia's work, and it's a really important piece of work that's happening in early childhood, and we really do need to and are connecting via DSS with the different development processes. So this is a framework for children with developmental concerns, delay or disability. It's not a framework only for children who are eligible for the NDIS, so I think that's really important to say that. I'll stop because I'm conscious there's time's passing on.
Thanks so much, Christine. And thank you to everybody who's put their questions and their comments in the chat. I'm going to start by apologising that in the time that we have left, we won't be able to get to everyone. What I'm going to try and do is smush some of the questions together so that we can cover some of that territory. And again, remind everybody that what we will do is try and bunch the questions up and theme them, and we'll put some of the answers up on the Healthy Trajectories website so we can see them. So I do want to go to the first question, which is, and a few people have made this comment in the chat, there seems to have been a bit of confusion about this review, about whether this is the official or the formal review and how does it fit in with other pieces of work. Tony, given that you're from the department and you commissioned this project, can you talk to us a little bit about that? And then Christine, I might come back to you.
Yeah, no problem. obviously recognising that another organisation has undertaken some independent work in parallel that can be confused with this project. So to be clear, this project is the only one that's commissioned and funded by the Department of Social Services to review and update guidance in early childhood intervention. And until this work is, I guess, sort of to reinforce that fact, until this work is completed, the 2016 ECIA National Guidelines for Best Practice in Early Childhood Intervention, so they're the only guidelines that are endorsed by the department and supported by the NDIA's early childhood partners as well. They are available on the department's website if needed to. So I think that sort of answers that question.
Thanks, Tony. Christine, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, probably just really to reiterate that we've really have and will continue to offer many opportunities for all stakeholders to be involved in consulting about the work that we're doing, and nobody's been excluded from the process. I think also it's really important to note that, and I think as you have heard tonight from the work that's going on, that we're not simply updating the existing guidelines, but actually we're really undertaking a broad review of the current evidence, practice and guidance in the sector, both in Australia and internationally. And really the subsequent development of the best practice framework will be up to date. It'll be relevant to current circumstances in Australia. It will include the materials to support and promote the use of the framework, really importantly. It's being informed by a range of existing evidence and the broad consultation that you've just heard about it. And we consider everything. And if you look at the reports online, you will also see that we have considered what was available in the literature when we did our literature review. We've talked to people who've attended our consultations and we've considered the views that have been brought forward.
That's great. Thanks, Christine. As you both flagged, there has been a lot of questions and sort of commentary in the chat about how this is going to fit in with all of the reforms. It's a very busy, crowded space, particularly the idea of kind of how will this fit with foundational supports. Tim, I might throw this one to you, and then maybe I think, Bruce, you might want to chime in after Tim.
We are thinking of this practice framework as applying very much to the foundational supports, particularly the targeted area, obviously. So we're not making a distinction between NDIS or the foundational support space. This is very much our what we're going to try and cover. Bruce?
Thanks, Tim. I think the best way to think about this is that there are three key pieces of work going on at the present time, all designed to reform and improve outcomes for children with disability, developmental delay or concerns. And so one piece is obviously the work we're doing on the early childhood intervention framework. The second piece is foundational supports, and as Tim's indicated, we would expect that this best practice framework would apply both to children who are in the NDIS and out of the NDIS, so all children, and provide a continuum of supports, and that those supports would be all delivered in a best practice way. And then the third element of reform at this time is obviously the changes to the NDIS Act, which will lead to reforms in the early intervention pathway. All children will come into the scheme under early intervention, and then we would very much expect and hope that the supports they receive align with this best practice framework. But all of these changes, whether we're talking about foundational supports or the detailed rules that will apply under the new legislation, there are strong commitments from the government to engage in all of those changes. And at the present time, the government is in fact engaging on targeted foundational supports for children. Thanks, Kirsten. Back to you.
Thanks, Bruce. We heard from Karen and Gretchen about how important it is to support the whole family, including siblings. And there's been quite a bit of chat about siblings in the chat. Tim, I'm going to come back to you again. Did the review of the literature highlight anything in particular for siblings?
It highlights the fact that when we're thinking about families, you not only think about the goals and the needs of the individual child, you need to think about the parents as parents and their own needs, their own support needs, and you need to think about the individual siblings in the family, or indeed the extended family, grandparents and so on. And the family as a whole. So this is a complex web of things that we need to consider, but you need to be asking about and thinking about this. Siblings represent a potential great source of strength, but if they are ignored, if there is undue emphasis on a single family member who may undoubtedly need help, but you must be very careful not to overbalance things. Everyone's needs, and the evidence clearly supports that.
Thanks, Tim. Karen, I'm going to sneak in a quick one to you. There's been some chat about support for families who are either culturally or linguistically diverse, or there's also been some chat about families who live in regional or rural areas. Did you hear anything about that when you talk to families across the country?
Thanks, Kirsten. Look, absolutely. And while we were really focusing our conversations on, on what good practice looks like and feels like when you're there with the therapist, of course, all those things that exist around that in terms of just finding the services, navigating them, wait lists, those particular challenges in regional and remote areas, and as well as sort of actually quite large areas of the city in terms of growth corridors, but also for culturally diverse families, just really hearing about feeling very confused about where they should start and the approaches to take, and needing to connect with other families from their cultural background to sort of build that peer network and the importance of that in overcoming stigma and things like that. So those sort of veins of conversation really came through all of the consultations.
Thanks, Karen. Now I'm going to give the last question to you, Christine. There's a question in the chat about this all sounds great, but how long is it going to take, and what's going to happen next? So that seems like a perfect way to end. So I'll throw to you.
Yeah. Okay, so I think I started to answer that a little bit earlier, but the development of the framework is in process, and it will be coming out, the sort of first iterations of it and the early parts of it, coming out very soon for feedback. We will be delivering this project towards the end of March, early April next year. And so that's when this project will come to its end. But as we've also indicated, this is part of a bigger piece of work that the government is undertaking. And so there'll be implementation issues to carry forward from there. That's for the department to make decisions about how that will happen, not for me. But I think it's important to know that part of our work will be to make recommendations around implementation as well. That answer your question, Kirsten?
Yes, thanks, Christine. But the point is that this is a next year job. It will come out next year.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Early next year.
Yep.
Yes, and I can see there's sort of concerns about the timelines of everything coming together, and that is important that we are connected across in the consultations and talking about what's happening in each of the bodies of work.
Yeah, that's great. So that's probably a really good note to end on, and just with a reminder that you can find out more information about the project. You can read the reports that have already been completed. The recordings of the webinar are all on the Healthy Trajectories website. You can see them all. And most importantly, if you want to get involved in what's next, in having a say on the draft framework and getting involved in those consultations, sign up for the project newsletter, and that way you'll be able to stay in touch with what we're doing and participate in those consultations. I want to finish by thanking all of the project partners for being here tonight and talking to everybody, but most of all, I want to thank you for making time on your Monday night to come and hear about this project and get involved, and for your fantastic engagement and questions in the chat. Like I said, we'll keep a recording of that and we'll build it into the work that we are doing. Thank you for making time. I know it is not easy. Thank you for coming along. Please sign up, stay in touch with the project, and we will look forward to seeing you all next time. Thank you. Bye.